This is always the moment when you find out if the tech works. All right, great. All right. So I almost turned this opportunity down. And I'm really glad I didn't. I'm really glad I didn't. There has been such an outpouring of warmth, of kindness, of welcoming from all of you here in Rapid City that it is a wonderful thing to be here, and I thank you for that as we start. But I'm going to start with some bad news. I want you to remember one number today, 8.4. 8.4. According to the Pew Research Group, 8.4 Catholic adults in the U.S. leave the Catholic Church for every one adult that joins the Catholic Church. That's the hard reality that we live in. And it's much higher than what you'll see for Protestants. For Protestants, according to Pew, only 1.8 Protestants leaving their denominations for everyone that's joining. And I'm offering you this graphic to represent this, and I drew this myself to kind of give you a grip on what does that look like. It took me 2.5 minutes to do, and most of that was how do you represent 0.4 of a person? Why though? Why do we have 8.4 Catholics, adult Catholics leaving the church for every adult Catholic that comes in? And Pew asked some questions about that. I'm putting them up here. I don't think they asked the right questions. I'm a clinical psychologist, but I'm also trained as an applied quantitative psychologist, which means I've been trained in doing surveys and so forth. And if you look at the questions that Pew asks about why, there's some really interesting things there. Number 4 especially, right? It just didn't seem relevant to my life anymore. But if you boil it down and you look kind of between the lines, it's because so many of these former Catholics don't believe that the church has the answers and the remedies to their problem. That's why they leave. They don't believe that the church has the answers and remedies to their problems. And more specifically, they don't believe that their deep unmet needs, their attachment needs, their integrity needs, and their identity questions are going to be adequately answered by the church. They're wrong about that. But that's what they think. And this is a stool of security and stability. This is a little graphic that I made to represent this. There's copies of this back at the table over there. You can pick one up on the way out if you want. But these are the attachment needs. Those are in red on the right. The integrity needs are in green on the left, and the identity questions are in blue in the middle. In my 30 years of treating clients, these are the things that come up over and over again that are beneath the surface. And these are the things I think that really do challenge those who are struggling with their faith, or in some cases not struggling with their faith. So that number, 8.4, that's a number that's haunted me since that survey has come out. I'm not going to go through every one of these needs. Again, we have another card. It's a little yellow card that will describe what each one of these needs is. But these are the things that really, really people struggle with. So what happens when these needs are not met? What happens when these identity questions are not answered adequately? What happens when human formation in Catholics is lacking. And that's what I'm all about. I'm all about human formation. Well, oops. Okay. Pope John Paul II, in his apostolic exhortation, Pastores Dabile Vobis, which came out in 1992, named human formation for the first time in a magisterial document. Human formation is one of the 4 dimensions of personal formation, according to St. John Paul II, along with spiritual formation, intellectual formation, and pastoral formation. And since it's only been 1992 since that came out, that's like 36 seconds in church time, right? Like that's really brand new in church time. And Pope John Paul II did not define what human formation was in 1992. And it really wasn't defined until just a few years ago. The first 5 editions of the Program for Priestly Formation came out, which is the document that governs the formation, the personal formation of seminarians and priests. It wasn't defined in those. But in the 6th one, it was. And they gave this definition. Following St. Thomas Aquinas, human formation should be understood as education in the human virtues perfected by charity. And I was like, I don't really know what that means, you know? There have been some things that have come out, and in that same document, PPF 6, there's this really wonderful quote about human formation. And the PPF 6 actually has the most extensive discussion of human formation that I could find anywhere in the church. And I look hard. I look really hard. And this is what that favorite quote is. Oops. There we go. In general, human formation happens in a 3-fold process of self-knowledge, self-possession, and self-gift. So I wanted you to remember one number, which was 8.4, and I want you to remember one phrase. Human formation unfolds in this process of self-knowledge, self-possession, and self-gift. And all of this in faith. As this process unfolds, the human person becomes more perfectly conformed to the perfect humanity of Jesus Christ, the Word made flesh. Now, this document is oriented towards seminarians and priests, but the human formation of seminarians and priests is not any different than the human formation of anybody else, really, right? Just like the arithmetic is not any different in statistics or in trigonometry or in algebra. And we're going to come back to this progression of self-knowledge, self-possession, and self-gift regularly in this talk. I wanted my own definition, though, because I'm kind of like that. So I'm going to offer this definition, which is kind of wordy, but we'll walk through it a little bit. I argue that human formation is the lifelong process of natural development aided by grace, in which a person integrates all aspects of his interior, emotional, cognitive, relational, and bodily life, all his natural faculties in an ordered way, conformed with right reason and natural law, so that he is freed from natural impediments to trusting God as his beloved child and to embracing God's love. And then in return, because he knows and possesses himself, he can love God, neighbor, and himself with all his natural being in an ordered, intimate, personal, and mature way. That's what I believe human formation is. And that's wrapped up in that other definition that we got from the PPF 6. But in order to do that, you have to understand what a Thomistic understanding of education is. And it's very different than what we tend to think education is. So this is a little bit more explicit. And one of the things that I discovered very, very early on as a clinical psychologist is that so many spiritual problems are really downstream spiritual consequences of human formation deficits, human formation issues. And it really, this is what really struck me early in my career, because I don't work primarily in the spiritual realm. I'm a clinical psychologist. People are coming to me because of psychological issues. But what I found was that clients who are struggling with God the Father, to have any kind of relationship with God the Father, we didn't talk about God the Father in therapy, but what we did was we worked on the father wounds that they had sustained with their earthly fathers, with their biological fathers or their adoptive fathers, their natural fathers. And when we did that, and when we worked through that, without any additional focus on God the Father, so many of the problems in relating with God the Father lifted. They went away. Why? Because the concept of father was so toxic in the heart, right? Resolving just what a father was, and some of that was because they experienced something of paternity from me, that freed them. That's a human formation issue. That's not a spiritual problem primarily. It doesn't have a spiritual origin, really. It has a human origin. And so many people prefer to have, so many Catholics, devout Catholics, I would bet that so many of you would rather have a spiritual problem than a psychological issue. You know, there's a bias, right? I'd rather be having a dark night of the soul than to be experiencing a depression, right? So I'm going to talk about some of the challenges and the headwinds that the church faces in addressing human formation. And I already addressed the first one, which is this happened 37 seconds ago that we heard about it in 1992 in Pastores Dabo Vobis. I'm going to be really blunt about this next one, and that is that you can't give what you don't have. And so many formators in the Catholic Church, whether those are in seminaries, whether those are even therapists, coaches, these are different types of formators, spiritual directors, so many of them do not have good personal human formation. I say that a lot because it's true. It doesn't get you invited to a lot of keynote addresses. A third thing is spiritual bypassing. What is spiritual bypassing? Well, if you go to John Wellwood, who was a psychologist in the 80s, he's a Buddhist actually, and he was noticing that people that were meditating in Buddhism were freaking out after a while. And it really was because of their human formation issues that were getting bypassed, that were getting spiritualized, that were trying to be avoided through spiritual practices, through the Buddhist meditative practices. And so he defined it as using spiritual ideas, words, and practices to sidestep or to avoid personal, emotional, unfinished business, to shore up a shaky sense of self, or to belittle basic needs, feelings, psychological wounds, and developmental tasks. In other words, it's about exiting the natural realm into the spiritual realm to avoid what's in the natural realm. And we do this a lot. I'm going to offer you this other definition. I don't think I'm going to read the whole thing because it's kind of long. Not that good at reading. I'm kidding. But again, this is the idea of spiritual bypassing. And there is a lot written about spiritual bypassing. It's a major topic, actually, in certain sectors in the psychological world. But when I Googled Catholic spiritual bypassing 3 or 4 years ago, there was nothing out there, almost nothing. Nothing. So I wrote a series of articles about it. They came out in 2023. You can pick them up on at soulsandhearts.com/blog and get into it in depth. But I'm going to give you an example of what spiritual bypassing looks like. So a widow, her husband's funeral, right? And she is avoiding dealing with the grief by saying, he's in a better place. He's in a better place. Which may well be true, but it's not addressing the grief that she feels. It's a way to bypass the intensity of her experience. And in one of these articles, I can't remember which one, I give 21 examples of spiritual bypassing that are relatively common in the church. I'll give you one of them, is that a seminarian, I'll use the example of a seminarian who has had a long history of psychological difficulties, but he and his spiritual director and the seminary formator say, well, he's had this reconversion in seminary. He's had this reconversion, and he is on fire with the Holy Spirit now. Well, I want to know, what's going on in the natural realm, because you can bypass that. So I think that's another habit that we have in the Catholic Church, is of spiritual bypassing. All right, so now I want to talk about hell. It's not fashionable to talk about hell these days in the Catholic Church. I'm thinking maybe this is my last keynote. At the beginning of Lent, getting into the spirit of it, I read this book by Monsignor Charles Pope called The Hell There Is, which is really his argument against universalism. Universalism is the idea that everybody goes to heaven. Very popular now. And there's also, this is my own theological contribution, even though I'm not an expert in eschatology. I coined the term quasi-universalism, which is everybody goes to hell except Hitler, right? So there's a version of this where only a few characters are in hell. And Monsignor Charles Pope, I really like him as an author. He details all of this really, really well. But the strongest argument for hell in my book, he mentions only in passing. It's the one that's really important to me as a psychologist. And the reason I believe in hell, the strongest reason I believe in hell, is because I have seen it. I have seen it. Not in the way that the Fatima children saw it, where they got it escorted down there, but because I've seen it in the lives of people who have alienated themselves from God, either intentionally or unintentionally, drifting away or actively railing against God. And so if we believe as Catholics that you can experience something of heaven on earth, something of beatific vision, St. Teresa of Avila, the different mansions, I also believe that we can experience something of hell on earth. And I now want to kind of get into this whole idea, and that is often has its roots in the human formation deficits. If you, because you had a terrible relationship with your father, avoid God the Father, avoid God altogether, in the end, if you persist in that, it doesn't matter what the reasons were, really. I mean, some of those reasons might mitigate some culpability, but if you continue to flee from God for whatever reason, you're going to wind up alienated from God. And I could tell you some stories about the hells that my clients have been through. And some died in them. I don't know if they're in hell or not. I hope not. I pray for them. But this human formation stuff is not just about, some sort of narcissistic navel-gazing where we light the aromatherapy, candles, and we play soft music and we tell ourselves that we're okay. This is not what it's about. It's about equipping ourselves to carry out the two great commandments, to love God and love our neighbor. Pope John Paul II said that human formation is the foundation of all formation. Absolutely all formation. He was very serious about that. We need to have that foundation, and that's the element of those four dimensions of formation that is far less developed than the others. And part of the reason why I'm here today is to talk with you a little bit about Catholic Social Services and how they address human formation, but we'll get to that in a little bit. I want to talk about sort of the consequences of not knowing yourself. And many of you may have heard of Carl Gustav Jung. He's studied under Freud, had a big, kind of bromance with Freud, and then they had a huge falling out. He was Catholic. He was raised Catholic. He left the church, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the future because he tells us why. He said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So much of what impacts us in our human formation is in our unconscious. Jim MacDonald writes that I suffer because my interactions with others did not meet the expectations I did not know I had. And do you know who that reminds me of? It reminds me, of course, of St. James. St. James. James 4, verse 1. Those conflicts and disputes among you, where do they come from? Do they not come from your cravings that are at war within you? St. James is telling us where the conflicts we have with other people come from. And he's not mentioning Satan. He's not directly mentioning even anything necessarily spiritual. He's talking about the cravings that are at war within you. Sometimes it's translated as the passions that are at war within you. If you want to understand the conflicts you have with other people, if you want to understand your end of it, understand the conflicts that you have within your own self. Because the things that you reject within yourself, the feelings, the desires, the impulses, the attitudes, the different positions, the beliefs that you hold on to, maybe in your left brain, kind of intuitively, but you reject with your right brain, that's the stuff you're going to have a very difficult time dealing with than anybody else. It's a human formation thing. These are human formation issues. This is my stock and trade. I want to go back to the unconscious, though, for a minute, because we talked about how critical that was. Carl Jung was telling us about that. Because I want to give you an example of how we are behind in the Catholic Church with regard to these things. So Lancelot Law White, in his 1960 book, The Unconscious Before Freud, he's a historian. He provides this history of the unconscious prior to Freud, and he says, the general conception of unconscious mental processes was conceivable in post-Cartesian Europe around 1700. Around 1700. It was topical around 1800, and it was fashionable around 1870 to 1880. The unconscious. It cannot be disputed that by 1870 to 1880, the general conception of the unconscious mind was a European commonplace, and that many special applications of this general idea had been vigorously discussed for several decades. In 1915, Freud first wrote about the unconscious. So this is all happening before Freud was writing. In 1915, Freud first wrote about the unconscious in a very deliberate way in a structured essay titled The Unconscious. But it wasn't until 1952 that the Vatican had anything to say about the unconscious. So we're talking 250 years after it was conceivable. We're talking 150 years after it was topical. We're talking 3 generations after it was fashionable, before the Catholic Church had anything to say about the unconscious. And that was in a September 14th, 1952 address by Pope Pius XII to the International Congress on Histopathology of the Nervous System. We can't be that far behind. We can't be that far behind. We should be ahead of the non-Catholic world in this. The church shows us what the spiritual works of mercy are. Oops. They're for the soul. We know how important the natural world is on a physical level. We have the corporal works of mercy, which focus on the body. We know that if people are hungry or thirsty or homeless or alone in illness or in prison, or if they're in financial need, it's going to be very difficult for them to embrace the gospel. And we start with that. What about the works of mercy for the heart? What about human formation works of mercy? The most difficult professionals to convert to Catholicism, I have worked with literally hundreds of professionals, and there's one profession where I have never personally known a convert to Catholicism. You know what that profession is? Anybody got a guess? Psychologists. Absolutely right. Now you can say that's because psychologists are a hard-headed bunch, and we are. But because psychologists know human formation, they know things about it at least. I wouldn't say they know it because they don't know the fundamentals behind it. They don't understand the anthropology and the metaphysics. But when they look at the church and with regard to human formation, and they see that we don't get to the unconscious until 1952, and then it's kind of mostly a cautionary note, we look like a bunch of knuckle-dragging Neanderthals. We really do. Somebody say, hey, have you ever heard of the Myers-Briggs? No. We got to be doing better than that, right? And so the prerequisite to self-possession is self-acceptance. So I'm moving on to self-possession now, self-acceptance. We have to accept ourselves if we are to possess ourselves. And I'm going to go back to Jung here. And remember, he was the psychologist, the psychoanalyst, and in his book, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, he said, the acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life. That I feed the hungry, that I forgive an insult, that I love my enemy in the name of Christ, all of these are undoubtedly great virtues. What I do unto the least of my brethren, that I do unto Christ. But what if I should discover that the least among them all, the poorest of all the beggars, the most impudent of all the offenders, the very enemy himself, that these are within me? And that I myself stand in need of the alms of my own kindness. That I myself am the enemy who must be loved. What then? Now comes the rub. This is what Jung thought back in the middle of the 20th century. As a rule, the Christian's attitude is then reversed. There is no longer any question of love or long-suffering. We say to the brother within us, Raka, and condemn and rage against ourselves. We hide it from the world. We refuse to admit ever having met this least among the lowly in ourselves. This is why I have trouble getting psychologists to kind of come into the Catholic Church, is because there are so many ways that Catholics treat themselves without love. And there's a long history, 20th century history, of Catholic psychologists leaving the church. This is documented in the book, Psychologism and Catholicism, Contested Boundaries by Robert Kugelman. Again, reading through that, I counted them up. About 80% of prominent Catholic psychologists, those who were writing, those who were presenting, those who were making an impact, left the church from 1910 to 1962. And many of them were Catholic priests. Many of them were Catholic religious at the time. There were a lot of reasons for that. Some of that had to do with the fight against modernism. A lot of it had, I think, to do with a misunderstanding, some rigid interpretations of Thomism in that effort against modernism. But Dr. Anthony Flood at North Dakota State, in his book, The Metaphysical Foundations of Love, emphasizes how St. Thomas Aquinas said that the way you love yourself is the radix et forma, the root and the form of the way you will love others. The way you love yourself will be the root and the form of the way you love others. And he says that the way you love yourself is the template by which you will love others. St. Thomas Aquinas also says in the Summa that you cannot love your neighbor more than you love yourself. That the way that you love yourself, the degree to which you love yourself is the limit to how you can love your neighbor. And I see this over and over again. That ordered love of self is part of the second great commandment. It's the neglected third love in the two great commandments. Love your neighbor, yes, as yourself. That implies that you are supposed to love yourselves in an ordered way. And that ordered self-love is necessary for you to make that third part of that progression self-gift. Because if you don't love yourself in an ordered way, if you don't value yourself, how are you going to make a gift of yourself? Who would want the gift? And so much of this is not a spiritual thing. It's really not. In its essence, it's a natural level thing. The issues are so much in the natural realm. Now you could argue, well, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you're a psychologist, right, you're going to try to claim all the territory, aren't you? Listen, I got enough work. I really do. I want to talk about a lot about the personal responsibility that each of you have for your own human formation, right? And I want to share with you some resources to focus in on this, on your own human formation, the things you can do for your own human formation. And some of these you are familiar with. I'm going to start with some relational means of human formation. Human formation, in its essence, is relational. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. That it can include not only the relationship with our parents, who are our first formators, right, but also relationships with other people. We'll discuss those. But also the relationship with God. Like that actually can have an impact on your human formation. The relationship with Our Lady. Remember, God our Father, Mary our Mother, they are our primary parents. They are our spiritual parents, but they're our primary parents, and not just in the spiritual realm. So many human formation issues can actually be resolved in relationship with our primary parents. But natural means are the ones I'm going to be focusing on. And so that includes mentors, both formal and informal, friendships, counseling and therapy, coaching. And I will mention prayer, especially a book by Father Thomas Acklin and Father Boniface Hicks called Relational Prayer, A Guide for Receiving the Father's Love. There are a number of people that I have talked to, I recommend this book a lot, that have experienced some real healing in the natural realm by working through that book. And now I want to talk about some internal means of human formation. And this is also relational. It would have to be. But it's you relating with you relating with your own self. Some introspective journaling where you're connecting and accepting different things within you. And that doesn't mean if you accept something that you're endorsing it. It doesn't mean that you are embracing it. It means that you're acknowledging the reality of some impulse or desire or some thought or some belief, some issue you're having. Experiential exercises. I'm going to hope we have time to do one, actually. I offer a lot of these in my podcast. And then writing a personal vision statement, a mission statement, and so forth. Those are really good. These are some different programs of human formation that are out there. Psychologist Greg Bottaro's Catholic Psych Institute, he's got some programs for folks that bring in elements of human formation. He focuses on all 4 dimensions of human formation, but some elements. Catholic Story Groups with Catherine Wessling. And then Exodus 90 has gotten very interested in human formation. They've consulted with us, and they've brought in Father Boniface Hicks to provide some programming that brings in some human formation aspects. None of those focus exclusively on human formation. That's what we do at Souls and Hearts. We're the only major outreach in the Catholic Church that focuses almost exclusively on human formation. And we do that through our Resilient Catholics community, We can tell you more about that if you'd like. I don't want to turn this into, some sort of like Amway convention where you're promoting your own stuff. We also have the Formation for Formators community, because one thing I noticed very early on is that you can't lead somebody where you haven't been yourself. And this is the major issue that I find with therapists, because I've done consultation and supervision of therapists for decades, but now also with coaches, and now sometimes with spiritual directors as well, that if they're getting unsettled in the work, it's usually not because of a lack of training or a lack of continuing education or a lack of skills. It's because the work is getting into somewhere where their own system, their own parts, their own internal, they don't feel a sense of safety anymore. And so there's these no-go zones. So I have a very special outreach to Catholic formators, to counselors and therapists, to coaches, to spiritual directors, to those who individually accompany others in their formation. You can find all that stuff at our website, soulsandhearts.com. One of the reasons here, that actually is Bishop Scott Bullock's crest. It's not him, actually, but it's his, just so you know. But one of the reasons I came here was because I became convinced, and it took some doing, that this actually is a hot spot for human formation, actually in the world. I'll talk about that a little bit more. I'm going to roll through this. It's evident in your bishop. Bishop Bullock brought human formation into the spotlight for Clergy Days in 2025. Bridget Adams, Grant Sassy, Abigail Sassy, they taught a three-day workshop on various aspects of human formation and internal family systems for all the clergy here in the diocese. And one of the reasons I think it's a hot spot is that you guys got some good things going. I was at Bishop Bullock's Mass yesterday. He said, listening is the first act of the Christian. It struck me, right? Listening. And there just happened to be like 12 OCIA candidates joining the church. I'm thinking your number might not be 8.4. It might be something substantially less than that. There are a bunch also of non-Catholic social services programs. I'm just going to run through some of these really quickly. Susan Safford, the Evangelization and Discipleship Director here at the Cathedral, brought Veritas Splendor Institute to the diocese, incorporating the 4 pillars of formation, including human formation, for laity in a structured 3-year program. Jacques and Annie Daniel are doing some really great things with the After Cana Marriage Ministry and a bunch of other things. You have the sisters, the servants of the pierced heart of Jesus and Mary here. Sisters teaching in the middle school and high schools, campus ministry, leading retreats, bringing in elements of human formation. Father Robert Kenyon, high school chaplain on campus relating with the kids. Sister Sarah, working with the diocese with revamping the Certified Lay Ecclesial Minister program for that 3rd-year formation in leadership, bringing in virtue and human formation. You got Focus Missionaries here. You've got Father Mark McCormick at the St. Carlo Acutis Center. Deacon Greg Sass leading diaconate formation that brings in that VSI, deepening with overnight retreats. Robert Aberley is doing things at St. Thomas More with human formation. Father Brian Christensen launched this whole Lenten series, Healing Begins With Me, that Bridget was active with. These are impressive things, and we haven't even gotten to Catholic social services yet, but let's get to Catholic social services. Okay, the mission, we saw it before on the slide, to share in Christ's ministry of offering hope, promoting individual human dignity, and strengthening families and communities by providing professional social services to people of all faiths in Western South Dakota. So, like when I believe that there were that Rapid City was about 250,000 people before I came out here. I thought it was like between 250 and 300,000 people. And I'm flying in, right? I'm flying in at night. And the plane is getting low, and I'm like, where's the city? Because I knew you were doing some of these things, right? I knew that there was a fair amount going on. I had taken a look at the annual report for Catholic Social Services. I'm like, what's happening here? 288 therapy clients served. The majority are uninsured or underinsured, sliding fee scales. You got the uplifting parents thing going on. The Trinity Family Services and Adoption for pregnant women, adoptive families, parenting education. There's lots of partnerships that are going to happen in there. The disaster relief and community outreach, the QPR suicide prevention stuff, question, persuade, refer, stuff is really critical. This is really critical, and it's all immediate to human formation. Patrina Pedri-Heiser, offering private coaching now. Who ever heard of a diocese at Catholic Social Services offering coaching? That really started to get big in 1995. 3 years after the Apostolic Exhortation Pastoris Dabo Vobis, that's 35 seconds in church time. You've got Grant Sassy, director of CSS here. He's been a member of the Resilient Catholics community, Souls and Hearts, for a long time now. I know he's doing his own personal human formation work. I have seen it. We met on a RCC, Resilient Catholics Community Retreat last year. He's brought IFS workshops, internal family systems workshops, to Catholic Social Services staff. There's staff supervision. There's ongoing, continuing human formation for clinicians. There's a program for parents now who are separating called the SMILE program. Common sense parenting classes. I have never seen. So I'm kind of a big deal in the human formation space, if I were to say that myself. And the RCC, and Souls and Hearts, we have members, we have thousands of members that come from 6 continents. I get to hear a lot about what's going on. And I have never seen this combination of variety and excellence in human formation offerings offered at a diocesan level before, anywhere. So, and to see all of this human formation work coming from a diocese of 21,000 Catholics, like, that blows my mind. That's incredible. That's impressive. So support it. Support it. Yeah. Support it with getting active, right? Oh, no, hang on a second. We got to start with prayers. So support it with your prayers. Definitely support it with your prayers. But support it also with getting active, right? With volunteering. Reach out to Catholic Social Services. There's a need for volunteers. Also support this human formation work financially. That means with money. It takes money to do this work. I've already made my donation. I came, I saw, I'm donating. Really, because you've got something here that's really important, and it's not just important for the Diocese of Rapid City. This is important for the 196 dioceses and archdioceses in the United States. This is important for the approximately 3,000 dioceses, archdioceses, and eparchies in the world. You guys are on the cutting edge of doing this stuff institutionally at a diocesan level. This is not just important for Western South Dakota. Human formation works of mercy, the works of mercy for the heart. Not just for the soul, not just for the body, for the heart. That's happening here. And then I'm going to ask you to support it finally with your own soul, and especially with your own heart, with your own human formation. We're all familiar with that saying, nemo dat quod non habet. I quoted that before, no one gives what they don't have. The 1955 hymn by Jill Jackson Miller and Cy Miller, let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. Remember James 4:1? Where do those conflicts and disputes among you, where do they come from? Do they not come from your cravings that are at war within you? This is a clarion call for you to do your own human formation work. You, all of you individually, to do your own human formation work. Uh-oh, I'm over. Do we want to do an experiential exercise now? Do we still want to do that? Do we have time? I don't know. Yeah. We do? We want to do experiential exercise. Okay. All right. I should have just took the 2-button clicker, because with the 3-button clicker I get confused. But all right, so much of the way we take things in is to our heads. This is going to go more to our hearts, okay? And so I'm going to invite you into what we call an experiential exercise. We do a lot of these at Souls and Hearts. And it's for you to actually connect in. I got to stop touching the mic. It's for you to connect in with your own heart, with the parts of you that might not be accepted, the parts of you that you might hate. We want to do this in a way that's safe, though, so take what's helpful to you. If this doesn't resonate with you, you don't have to do it, all right? And this will also be short. But a big open heart to anything that is disordered, anything that is dysfunctional, anything that's out of whack within your own system, within your own heart. Can we approach that not the way that Carl Jung accuses us Christians of, rejecting it, but can we have some compassion? Can we have some openness to the why of what's wrong within us? Parts of us are seeking our own good, even when they generate impulses or desires for things that are harmful or maladaptive or sinful. Can we get at what is the good intention there? What is the attempt to help? Can we take a minute and just kind of see with new eyes, looking through eyes of love at this rather than eyes of judgment, condemnation, rejection? Can we see what's beyond the surface, what's beneath? What would happen if we extended a little love to a part of us that's struggling? And that might be having these impulses to act out, or to shut down, or to do that thing that we don't want to do. Could we have a little compassion? What would happen if we had a little love for that part? And what might be a next right step for my personal human formation? What might be a next right step in the natural realm? Might there be a resolution here of something that I can do that would help me love me in an ordered way, and not just that it stops there, but so that I can love God more completely with more of me, with all of my parts, that I can love my neighbor more completely with more of me? What might be a next right step? And maybe there's a resolution that can come from that that sounds right and good. for all of you. Something maybe different than the way you've done before. Our patroness at Souls and Hearts, our patrons, are all saints who focused on human formation, who prepared the way for the spiritual formation, prepared the way for the rest of formation. And I'm going to invoke them now as we draw this keynote to a close. Our Lady, our Mother, untie her of knots. Saint Joseph, Saint John the Baptist. Thank you.